everyone and welcome along to the Christmas Wreath Kit tutorial. Thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for all of your orders. I'm completely blown away by how many of you have ordered your kits and I really hope that you're going to love them. So whether you're doing this on your own for moments of peace and quiet, or if you're in a group of you and have sort of put together your own Christmas wreath workshop, well, welcome, and I'm so glad you're here with me. So let's begin. So first of all, I'm going to talk you through all of the ingredients in your wreath kits, go through step by step how to create your wreath, and yeah, you can follow along at your own pace. Okay, so first of all, you will have in your kit your metal wreath base, you will have your binding wire, you will have your fresh sphagnum moss for your wreath base, you'll have your wired sort of selection of goodies. So you'll have your cones, your cinnamon, your berries, your lotus seed heads and your oranges. You will also have your twine for hanging, and then of course your beautiful dark navy sort of velvet ribbon to create your bow. We've got some red skimmier berries, we've got some viburnum berries, which is this lovely kind of deep blue sort of tone to them. We've got the eucalyptus populus berries, we've got some pinus, and we've got some eucalyptus baby blue, and of course the blue spruce as well. So that's all the ingredients for your kits, and I'm going to take you through step by step on how to create the most beautiful wreath and to create something that's really professional looking. So you'll also need probably scissors and if possible some secateurs as well. Okay, so first of all, you're going to take your wreath ring and you're going to create a sort of structure for your moss to go on top of. And what we're going to do is we're going to use our binding wire and we're going to wrap it round to create a sort of fastening, and then you're going to go over and under in a sort of zigzag pattern. And this stops the moss from sort of falling through the gaps, basically. Just provides that extra bit of support. Okay, now once you've finished doing that, you leave your binding wire attached, because then it's used to basically bind the entire wreath together. Okay, so now we're going to go into our sphagnum moss. So you'll have a bag of fresh sphagnum moss. Now this will be damp, and the purpose of the moss is to sort of provide that water source for your wreath. Near the end of the tutorial, I'll start talking about care and how to prolong the life of your wreath. But the idea is that because it's damp, it sort of makes sure that the foliages stay as fresh for as long as possible. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're just going to cover your wreath ring with the moss and do the same technique where you go over and under and you bind your moss to your wreath ring. Now some of the moss is fresh green, some of it's sort of darker in colour, and some of it's sort of brown with the root system. That's fine, you're not going to see really any of your moss. It's purely there as a sort of, as I say, watering system. So you're going, placing your moss on top, and then you're going over and under. Now these sort of over and unders, excuse me, don't need to be sort of particularly massively close together really. You can sort of do them quite far apart. The main sort of idea is just that the moss is attached and sort of sturdy against the wreath base. Okay, so we're coming to the end of that first step. And again, don't, excuse me, don't take the binding wire off, leave it attached. Okay, so there we have it. So that's our moss covered wreath ring. And if you've got any moss left over, those of you that have either ordered or seen our Hello Petal pockets will know we love moss. So it makes a lovely sort of topper or surround to any plants that you might have. So, you know, if you've got any left over, then you can still use that for something else. Okay, so now we're going to start the exciting bit and start actually building our wreath. And to do that, we need to break down all of our sort of ingredients. So I'm going to start with the red berries, the red skimmia. Now this is a beautiful garden house plant. We're actually doing this in our kits for this month, for December, as a sort of little potted plant that you can keep indoors during Christmas time, and then once the season's over, you can pop that in the garden, in the ground. So it's a really lovely toned red, which I think sometimes with Christmas it's nice to be really festive, but it's also quite tricky, I find, to find a red that's really sort of beautiful in tone and sort of that kind of burgundy red. But anyway, the skimmia, that's definitely it. Okay, so we're going to break it down into little sections, so we're not going to waste any of it. And so you're looking for sort of sections like this, and then pop it in a pile in front of you. Now this one is quite a large piece, so I'm actually going to break it down twice. So I'm going to cut it just above those sets of leaves. So then I've got two sort of little touches of the red berries that I can use in two different areas of my wreath. And then we're not going to waste any of the beautiful leaves that are on this skimmia, because they create another texture, another sort of, you know, a colour tone of green. So we're going to use these leaves in our wreath. And if you have any sections like this, you can take off the stems that you've cut and then still use that kind of section. And the same again here. I'm just going to cut off. Ooh. So that I can then use this. Okay. And then let's move on to the viburnum berries. Now, when these arrive in your kits, you might see them and think, oh, they're not particularly pleasant, because the leaves on them, admittedly, aren't great. I don't know why, but some of the leaves sometimes just look a bit kind of rough and ready. So we're going to take those leaves off, and really we're focusing on the berries in this instance. So unlike the skimmia, where we wanted to use those kind of beautiful deep green leaves, this, you don't need to keep the leaves on. So again, it's the same as the skimmia. I'm just breaking it down into little pieces, taking off those kind of gnarly leaves. Some of them will be absolutely fine. And then adding it to my pile in front of me. So that's the viburnum done. And then discard anything you don't need. I'm throwing mine on the floor. Okay, now we're moving on to the eucalyptus populus berries. This is one of my favourite types of eucalyptus. I always associate this with Christmas. It's gorgeous. It's got that lovely sort of grey, green tone leaf with the berries as well. So it's a win-win. So again, with this one, you're just going to start breaking it down into little sections and then adding it to your pile in front. And again with this, let's not waste anything. You know, use the whole sort of amount of stems that are in your wreath kits. Ooh. Now, when it comes to cutting your foliage, the size that I've kind of sort of indicated that I'm doing is probably the size that will create you a rustic wreath that's kind of loose and natural in sort of shape, but still compact. Now, if you want it to be really kind of wild and wintry, you can leave your stems slightly longer. So a shorter stem will result in a more compact wreath, and a longer stem will result in a more sort of wild wreath. Nearly there. So this is the sort of labour intensive section of wreath making, and then the actual kind of binding it to your wreath ring is actually a lot sort of more relaxing and a bit less labour intensive, I guess. Okay, so now we're moving on to the pinus. So this is just the pine. It smells lovely, it smells like Christmas. And we're just going to break this down into smaller sections. Again, using all of it. You can do some longer pieces, some shorter pieces. So that's the kind of size you're looking at. And then add that to your pile at the front. All smaller bits already, so they are fine. We won't miss that bit. Okay, so that's your pine, and now moving on to your eucalyptus baby blue. So this is really delicate. It's a good foliage if you want to create that sort of slightly wilder look, so you leave these a little bit longer. So I would be cutting this sort of about that sort of size. And then you break down each of the stems. Some of them will have multiple stems coming off the main stem, but you're looking at sort of this kind of size, which will really create a beautiful texture on your wreath. Obviously, if you have some smaller sections, you know, don't discard them. We can still use those. It's just nice to have a few longer sort of stems of foliage to really create that kind of wild, rustic look. that's your eucalyptus baby blue. And then last but not least is your blue spruce. So this is just the ultimate Christmas foliage, smells incredible. And for this, you need to break this down into sections that sort of have the nicest part of this foliage on display. So what we're looking at is sort of sections like this. And then you can also break it down further into smaller sections like this. So you're sort of working on the basis that you're cutting your spruce, the little kind of fronds that come off the main stem from the main stem. So if you've got this long sort of trunk stem here, you're going to cut the little sections that come off, and then you'll probably then also cut the main section at the top. But either way, it's not, you know, it sounds like it's complicated, but it's not. Just follow your instincts and go with the bits that look nice. Now, obviously, it's completely up to you. I personally wouldn't then use a section like this. So I wouldn't use a section that's got a really obvious cut to it, because it just doesn't look aesthetically beautiful on your wreath. So I would discard those bits. Now, as you will probably see from the bench, you've got lots and lots and lots of foliages. So you don't need to worry about discarding anything that's just not going to add to your wreath whatsoever. Nearly there with the spruce. I may have put one extra stem on my bench by mistake, because I don't think we need all this at all. But whatever you have in your kit will be exactly what you need, but I think I've probably mistakenly put an extra bit of foliage in there. Okay, so that is all of our foliage and berries all cut down and ready to be beautifully binded to our wreath ring. Okay, so now the fun begins. So you have your wreath ring with your binding wire attached, and now this is the crucial sort of tip. This is the tip that will take your wreath from being maybe unprofessional looking to being really professional looking. And that is when you lay down your foliages, and I'll show you how to do that in a second, you need to follow one direction. So you either need to go in a clockwise way or an anti-clockwise way around your wreath, and that will all become clear in a second. But I just want to make it clear that that is what is going to elevate your wreath making into something so beautiful, and something that you would not know was done by a florist, or, you know, somebody that's never created a wreath before. So what we need to do is to create our little posies of foliage, and there's one, so foliage and berries, and then one thing that's wired, which is your cinnamon, that will also go in your posies. And then everything else, I'm trying to think if they will poke through, I can't remember. Let's do these berries as well. So you've got your cinnamon to go in, the posies that I'm going to show you in a second, and your ilex berries to go in. Everything else, these three things here, will go in after you've made your wreath. Okay, so let's begin. So I personally go in a clockwise motion. So I have my wreath ring with the binding wire to the left of it, and I sort of construct it that way, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Right, so now let's start. I usually go with a bit of blue spruce first, because I feel like it's quite structured and heavy, and then I usually go with the more delicate sort of buried things on top. So you're going to take your foliages in whichever hand, sort of the opposite hand that you're dominant, I guess. So I'm right-handed, so I'm holding it in my left, and then I'm just going to build a posy of the different foliages that we have in front of us. And then I'm going to add some skimia to that as well. And then I'm going to add, I'm going to add a bit of viburnum, so the blueberries. And that is your first posy. So now this posy that you've created, it's in your hand, sort of tightly in your hand, sits at the side of your wreath, pointing upwards. So that could be on your left-hand side, it might be on your right-hand side of your wreath. But either way, you place it on top of your moss at a slight angle. So you're thinking probably 11 o'clock. So you're sort of pointing it towards 11 o'clock. So say that's 12 o'clock, 11 o'clock. You're then going to hold it securely with your hand, take your binding wire, and you're going to go up and over and under. A bit like how you did your moss and your sort of structured sort of wiring right at the beginning. And then I'm going to go back over again, like that, and then I'm going to twist. So then I've got a new section here that's free, and that is where I'm going to place the next posy on top of the sort of unattractive stem section of your previous posy that you've just laid down. It will all become clear, I promise. Okay, so let's add another posy. So I'm going to take some spruce and some pinus on top, and then some baby eucalyptus populus, and then for this one I'm going to put some more baby blue in. I might put a couple of bits of baby blue. And then I'm going to put in my ilex berries. And then I might I'm going to go in with a bit more of the eucalyptus and populus, so a few more berries there. Okay, so I have my new posy. And I'm then going to lay that posy down on top of the previous posy. So you can't see any of the stems. So that's it before. That's it going on top. And as you can see, I'm doing it in the same motion. So all those two posies both face the same way, whether that's clockwise or anti-clockwise. So you're then going to hold it down, over and under, nice and tight. You don't need to be shy with it or delicate. And again, and then untwisting. So then you've got your two posies on there, both facing the same direction. Okay, let's create another posy. Okay, new posy made. So that's going in the same direction on top of the binded stems that are already down on your wreath. Slightly at 11 o'clock, so slightly pointing outwards, holding it down with your hand nice and tightly, over and under with your binding wire. You can be nice and assertive with it, and then I'm going to twist. Okay, so that's your third posy down, and you can see now it's starting to take shape. So you've got that kind of really lovely motion of it all flowing in the same direction. Okay, so next one. We go in with some cinnamon this time. Now these pieces of cinnamon are lovely and sort of gnarly, and they smell incredible. Okay, I'm gonna lay that down. So that's going on top of the previous posy stems, slightly facing outwards, so at 11 o'clock, hands going over, nice and tight, over, under, pull a little bit, over, under, pull a little bit, and twist. Okay, next posy. Now if you're finding that some of your posies are looking a bit kind of, I'm trying to think of another word to boring, but it's because boring is not the right word, like there's not much going on in that posy, don't worry, because that's where all the sort of wired elements in your wreath kits come into their own. So that's when we add them on top. Okay. Use some viburnum again, I think. And some baby blue on top. And then a bit of the sort of the golden orangey red ilex berries. Okay, so posies made, posies ready, goes on top of your previous stems, of your previous posy, slightly at an angle, over and under, tight, over and under, pull tight. Okay, and then twist. Now, I've just laid that on top of the previous posy that had some cinnamon in it, and you can't now see the cinnamon. So what you now do is you pull up gently the cinnamon and sort of tuck the foliages behind it, and there you go, you can now see it again. Okay, next posy. Some skimmer on top. I always put the sort of more interesting foliages and berries on top because you want to be able to see it. And then, you know, like I said, you go with the more structured stuff at the back. Okay, so we have our stems from our previous posy, and that's going to be laid on top at a slight angle. Hold it down with your hand, up and over, and pull it a little bit tight. Up and over, and pull it tight, and then twist. Okay. Ilex, and I'm going to use some of the skinnier leaves. Okay, so new posy made, placing it on top of the stems of your previous posy, holding tight with your hand, and then with the other hand pulling your binding wire up and over twice, pull it nice and tight, and then twist. So we're still going in that lovely motion. Now the next posy, I'm going to add the cinnamon in, and the reason I'm going to do that is because I've seen that I've used my cinnamon here, and if the next posy is going here, I want to add my cinnamon there, and then my third cinnamon will go here, because you're creating a triangle. but that will all become clear when we do our other bits and bobs as well. But it's all about creating triangles with the same sort of ingredients. And now I'm not talking about the foliages because they don't really count, because they just are forming that body of the wreath. But when it comes to the sort of more decorative sort of elements, that's when it's good to work in triangles. Now, completely opposite to that, you can, if you want to, cluster. So you can cluster all your cinnamon together, and you can cluster all your oranges together, and that creates a sort of a different look, but you know, beautiful as well. So it's completely up to you, but I personally prefer things to be sort of spread amongst the wreath and sort of dotted about in the sort of triangle formation. But I will show you that afterwards. So cinnamon goes in. So you basically, because it's wired, you just sort of pop the wire in amongst all the stems of your foliages. So that goes on top of your previous posy, over and under twice. I mean, if you've got, so I've got a longer stem there, so I've gone over 3 times. So if you've cut your foliages a bit longer, you might need to go over and under 3 times. Okay, and then twist. Okay, next posy. Some viburnum in that one, and some of the ilex berries. Okay, so that's going to be placed on top of the stems of your previous posy, and then I'm going to wrap the binding wire round and then twist. And then that cinnamon I'm just going to slightly pull through so that you can see it a bit better. Next posy. Okay, so on top of your previous posies stems, up and over, secure it all in place. This one I'm going to do 3 times and then twist. So at this point, because I know I've probably got 1, 2, 3 posies left to lay down, I'll start adding in, making sure I'm using up all of my ingredients. Now, I've probably popped an extra piece of spruce on my table for some reason, so I'm probably not going to use all of it, but it just means that then you can start using most of your ingredients, so you're not left with anything that you wish you put in. Okay, that's that posy on, and then twist. And at this point I now need to add in my last piece of cinnamon, so the third piece, to create that triangle effect on your wreath. Okay, laying that down on top of the stems of your previous posy, and then up and over, nice and tight, and then twist. Okay, I think there's 2 more posies to do. So use your best bits. Oh, sorry. Okay, and then laying that down on top of the stems of your previous posy, up and over, nice and tight. Okay, and then twist. So I think we're now at the point of our last posy. So now this is the kind of bit that is probably, out of the whole wreath, the trickiest section. So what you're going to achieve is a posy that's going to sit on top of the previous posy stems, but also tuck under the first posy that you laid down's stems. It will make sense, I promise. Okay, so let's make the posy. So using all your good bits, don't necessarily create, if you've got things left over, a huge final posy, because it won't then fit and sort of flow with the rest of the wreath. So just try and keep it the same, and then you can use any leftovers to make a little bud vase arrangement or something like that. But yeah, don't go massive on the last posy just to use stuff up, because then it will be a bit wonky. Okay. There we go. Right. I'm now going to trim this posy slightly, not a lot, just a little bit. So I'm just going to do that to the side. You won't be able to necessarily cut the wire, which is why I can't cut this bit, but if you cut the foliages. Okay, so now we're going to lay this posy on top of the previous posy stems and tuck it under the first posy. So holding it nice and sort of assertively in your hand, you lift up your first posy and sort of tuck it under, and then you take your wire and you tuck that behind the first posy, nice and tight. And often this is the area that you will put your bow. So if it's not perfect, it really doesn't matter. If you feel like you've got a bit of a gap, again, it really doesn't matter. You can start to kind of zhoosh the foliages on top. Okay, now take your binding wire and snip it. So you're looking at sort of, it doesn't actually matter how long you're sort of cutting it at. It's not good in English, is it? It doesn't matter how long your sort of piece of binding wire is, because you're just going to basically cast off, much like you would if you were sewing or something. So to cast off, you take that behind your wreath, and you are going to cast off by wrapping it around the sort of coppery coloured wreath ring. Now, it's tricky for me to show you without laying my wreath sort of flat down, so I'm just going to twist it and see if I can show you this way. So you're basically, it's almost like you're sewing with a needle. You're just going to thread your binding wire. You just need to do this 2 or 3 times. Under and over one of the sections of the wreath ring, and then you're going to then cut it, leave an inch or so, and then you take it and you bend it over to form a little hook, and then you push it into your wreath, and then that's nice and secure and it's not going to sort of scratch anything. Okay, so that is the first stage of your wreath. Okay, I hope you enjoyed it. That's kind of the tricky bit. That's the most sort of technical bit over and done with. So now we can start adding all the fancy bits to your wreath. So we've got your dried oranges, we've got your lotus heads and your pine cones. I've got a bit of ilex berries left over. If you have, you could probably put them in too if you want to. You can poke them in, but I'll show you how to do that now. Now, I can't remember where I've just cast off. Let me see if I can work it out. Okay, it doesn't really matter. So, looking at my cinnamon, you have got a triangle. So you've got 3 pieces of cinnamon that make a triangle. So now we're going to make more triangles with our other bits. So let's start with the oranges. So I would then, say you've got 2 pieces of cinnamon, I would put my orange in the middle of those 2 pieces of cinnamon, if that makes sense. And all you need to do is poke the wire through your wreath ring, go to the back and simply fold it back on itself and tuck that piece of wire in. It's that simple. You poke it through so it will come out like that, and then you bend it on itself and just poke it in. And there's your first piece of orange. And then obviously in the spirit of the triangles, you're then going to add your next orange in between the next 2 cinnamon sort of pieces along. So I'm going to pop it in here. So again, just threading your wire through your wreath. I mean, that's nice and sturdy. You can trim the wire at the back if you want to. I'm just going to bend it back on itself and push it in purely so that there's no wires sort of sticking out, so nothing's going to get scratched. Okay, so then finding the other 2 pieces of cinnamon. So my next orange is going to go here. So then I will have my lovely orange triangle. Okay, so pushing it through. And then, so it's come through, bending it over and pushing it back through the wreath. Okay. Now, it's worth noting, and again, this isn't crucial, but in my opinion, I think it sort of adds to the professional look of your wreath. Now that your oranges are in, you can sort of angle them to face the way the rest of your foliage is faced. So mine all face a clockwise motion, sort of clockwise direction. So I have already done it really, but if you say stuck your oranges in and they're facing upwards, you can slightly tilt them to face the direction of your foliages. It just makes your wreath look professional, and it takes it from being sort of, you know, plonk there to having a sort of emotion and intention, and it just makes the wreath look even more beautiful. Okay, so we're going to go with our lotus now. Now these are dried lotus seed heads, and they are one of my favourites. They just look really textured. So they're going to go in a triangle as everything else. So I can see spaces between my cinnamon and sort of the next orange along. So I'm going to start with my lotus in the middle of the 2 oranges, and then it will be just a little bit further along from the cinnamon. So popping that through, and again, same situation, bending it back on itself and pushing and flattening that wire against your wreath. Then I'm just going to have a little bit of a zhuzh. Have it pointing in the motion of your wreath if you so want. And then we're going to put the next one in between the next two large oranges. Now there is a piece of cinnamon there, so I'm just going to kind of move that a little bit because it is on a wire, so it is, you're able to sort of manipulate where it goes. Pushing it through, bending it back and pushing that in, and then I'm going to slightly push it down so that it's facing the same way as my foliage is. And then the next lotus will go again in between these two oranges. So that will go here, just next to a piece of cinnamon. Pushing that in, bending it back and pushing that wire into your wreath. Okay, so those are the lotus. And you can kind of just start playing around, lifting your foliages up, you know, nestling them amongst everything so it looks organic, it doesn't just look plonked in there. Just a nice way to kind of make your wreath look even better. I like it when things, you know, they're just sort of snippets of those things, they're just peeping through, they're not sort of there and, you know, sort of, it just looks a bit more subtle. Okay, so now we're going to put the cones in. So this is the final sort of twinkly bit before we do the ribbon. So you have 3 of your pine cones and they're ready wired for you. And I'm going to put mine in between my sort of cinnamon and my lotus. So again, I'm going to go in a triangle. It doesn't necessarily matter where it goes, just make sure you've got space for it and make sure that there's then space for the next one along in your triangle sort of formation. So again, I pop that in and that's heading in the motion of my wreath, the clockwise sort of direction of everything. Okay, adding in my next one here. Can't find where that wire went. Take care again. I'm going to poke myself in the hand now. I can't find it. It's not coming through, but it's going in. Okay, that might be too short, so it's just not come through the other side, which is fine. Feels nice and sturdy anyway. And then sort of tuck that in amongst all those beautiful foliages. Nestle it in. And then the last cone. Oh, I've just broken. Okay. That's going to go orange cone, orange cone. Okay, so that's going to go right here. So pushing it through, bending it back, pushing that in, and then sort of manipulating it a little bit gently so that it's facing in the same way as everything else. And you can have a little bit of time just to sort of move things around gently, kind of, you know, spray the sort of foliages out, cover any bits that you want to cover. Okay, and now we're going to create our bow. But first of all, actually, we're going to hang it. So you will have your twine to hang. Now, I would suggest double twining it. So what I mean by that is I'm kind of folding in half, and then that will be sort of the strength of the string. It just means it's less likely to fall off the door, which, you know, after you've spent so much time is not what you want. So looking at my wreath, I don't think there is any obvious point on my wreath that should be the top, should be the bottom. So I'm just going to go for what's in front of me here as the top. You might find that where you've sort of put your final piece in, there might be a bit of a gap, but don't worry, because you can use that as your top, and then that's where your ribbon can go. So in between two posies, you'll find that it's sort of there's a slight obvious gap. So you just thread your ribbon through, your twine through, so that it comes out the other side like this, and then you simply pull it so that it's even, and then you just create a knot. It sounds more technical, it's not. You literally are just putting a piece of twine at the top of your wreath, double knotting it, and then you have your sort of hanging mechanism, so you can hang it like that. Now I'm going to leave mine like this, so I'm not going to tie it, because it depends on what it's going on. You know, if you've got a knocker here, or if you've got a hook, it doesn't, you know, it depends. I would tie it once you know what it's being hung on. Okay, and now we can put the bow on. So you can, of course, go on YouTube and find so many tutorials on how to create a really, really sort of beautiful bow, an elaborate bow, or you know, something a little bit different. So by all means do that. I'm personally just going to do a really nice, simple, kind of quite organic looking bow, and I'll show you how to do that. So if you take your navy ribbon and fold it in half, like that, and then sort of take one loop and then pinch it together. So you've created that lovely kind of full bow loop. Then you take the longer section and you wrap that round as you would doing any kind of bow. And then you're going to sort of twist the ribbon. Now the reason you're taking it from that, which is the matte side, the non-velvet side, the reason you're twisting it is because you want the ribbon, the other sort of bow of the ribbon, or the loop of the ribbon, to be velvet and not sort of the backing kind of material. So you twist it and you then thread that through to create your second bow loop. And then you sort of, she says, just give it a bit of a jiggle and a bit of a tie to make it a little bit tight. Now, you then fold the one of your tails sort of over so that your navy is showing, your velvet showing, and then you pull it back through. And then you can have a little kind of play, making that loop nice and neat. And again, the other side, you're just going to pull it and then kind of re-zhuzh the loop. And then the same for the bit in the middle. Okay, so that's kind of what I like. I like it to look sort of quite authentic, quite sort of relaxed and natural, to tie in sort of with the rusticness of the wreath. So give it a go, but if in doubt, just, you know, make a bow that you would ordinarily. It will still look gorgeous. Or, you know, have a look on YouTube and you'll find all sorts of lovely bow tutorials. Okay, I'm now going to take my piece of wire, which I have lost in amongst all my stuff. Okay, I'm just going to take it off one of these eyelet berries. So you will have a piece of wire in your kits, and the purpose of that wire is to go behind your bow. So flip your bow over, and you're just going to thread that piece of wire through the knot at the back. You're then going to sort of twist it on itself. And again, it doesn't matter how you do this, it's just as long as there's a piece of wire that's secured onto your bow. So then you've got a piece of wire that will go into your wreath. I'm then going to trim my tails. So now, forgive me, because I've probably not done an amazing job of this bow, because one of them is a little bit shorter, one of the tails, but I'm going to do a nice sort of diagonal cut. I always do one slightly longer again, just to make it look a bit kind of less sort of staged, a bit more authentic. And then where I have put my twine, I'm then going to poke, as I have done with the oranges and with the cinnamon, and with the cones and the lotus. I'm just going to push, she says, my bow wire through, and then pull it back on itself. And as we've done with all the other wires, I'm just going to push that back in. And then I'm just going to have a final kind of mess around, making sure I can see all the bits that I want to see, all my favourites, just gently moving things about. Okay, so just to give you some sort of tips on how to look after your wreath. Obviously you have your mossed base, which is the damp sort of moss base that we did right at the beginning. The ideal is to keep that damp. Now, if we have a December where there's no rain, or if you have your wreath hung in a porch and it can't get anywhere, can't get any rain, or if you're a south-facing house and you know the sun's on it most of the time, I would suggest just taking a jug of water and just sort of pouring it behind your wreath and just giving it a bit of a drink. You're sort of watering your moss base, not the front of the wreath. That will then prolong the life of your wreath. Also, saying that, I obviously have a wreath on my door every year. I don't think I've ever done that. I don't think I've ever actively looked after my wreath. I've popped it on my front door. I have a south-facing front door, and it has lasted well into January. I know lots of people that have had our wreaths that still have them on their door until the spring wreath kits, and then they take them down. They just dry beautifully. So don't worry too much. If you want to water it, great. If you think it needs a drink, brilliant. But other than that, it will just dry beautifully. And yes, hopefully you have enjoyed this tutorial and you've enjoyed making your wreath. But just as a final note, and I'm going to bore you again, same direction, pointing everything in the same direction, working in triangles, and you will create the most beautiful wreath. So yes, please do send me photographs. I would love to see them. Tag me in anything you put on Instagram. Again, it just fills me with joy when I see your beautiful wreaths after you've received your kits. And have a lovely, lovely Christmas.